the slide here. So, Seho, I'm going to introduce you in order. So we have with us Carmen Capo-Lugo from Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. Carmen, can you say hey?
Hello, it's great to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. And she's here with Judith Gross from the Beach Center on Disability at the University of Kansas. Judith?
Hi, great to be here. It's been a great presentation so far.
I hope so. Teresa Grassi from the Indiana Institute on Disability and Community at Indiana University.
Hi, I'm here, and it's been a great afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're thrilled you could join us. And last but not least, there's John Kramer from the Institute for Community Inclusion and the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and Children's Hospital, Boston. John, you want to say hi?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here.
So thanks, everyone. So as I mentioned, before we turn to the discussion questions, I'm going to take a tip from our presenters, and we're going to get a better sense of who's in the room by letting you respond to a couple of quick polls. So we're going to pull one of those up, and I'm going to stop talking for a couple of minutes while you all get a chance to submit your response. The question is, have you attended one of our KT conferences in the past? No, this is my first time. Yes, once or twice. Yes, every year. Okay, it looks like the responses are pretty stable. So of those who responded, about 2/3, this is their first time joining us, so that's great, reflecting some good new outreach. And about 1/4 might have attended in the past, and we've got our core 15%, 8 responders saying yes every year. Okay, so that's good to know. Moving on to the next poll, get a little bit of sense of who is in the room as far as the international and national context you're working in. Which of the following settings is most relevant to your work? On this poll, we of course included the U.S. since our funding agency is domestic, and the target audience for this conference is grantees of our funding agency, the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. But we recognize the great leadership that Canada, particularly the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, have played in the knowledge translation field, and we welcome our friends in the North. And we really love it when we get participation from other countries. I think we have had some register, and maybe they're just being shy and not participating in the poll, because I see we have 90 participants still online and only about half of you are doing the poll, but that's okay. So yeah, so, you know, a good vocal representation from Canada, but most still from the U.S., in case that helps inform the discussion as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull that poll down, and we're going to look at another one in case it is helpful. What are your reasons for attending this conference? Do you want to learn about knowledge translation and learn about communication science and social media? Learn specific tools for creating infographics? Hear about what others in the field are doing? Improve your organization's capacity to communicate using social media and or other innovative technology? Or is there something we didn't think of, and we'd love it if you let us know in the chat. Yes, Lena's pointing out you cannot select all that apply. Again, if you are struggling between 2 answers, go ahead and let us know that you put one down, but you really wish that you'd include something else. Good to know, Jess. I can only select one, but I wanted to select all of them. And okay. And I appreciate Melissa Kolsky pointing out that she is not sure she can answer polls on her mobile device. We appreciate that feedback, because a lot of this conference does assume that people are on a desktop computer. And we have a doctoral student working on translational health sciences. Okay, I think that's enough there with the polls. We can see that most of us generally want to learn about knowledge translation. Now let's move on to the meat of our time together and take a look at the questions. So we really appreciate, a lot of you did submit questions, and the staff, we definitely take them seriously, looked at all of them, and here are some of the more synthetic questions that we tried. Not everybody is able to pose this. Some of the questions were really super specific, so that's great for the chat, but we tried to come up with themes, almost do like a content analysis of the question. So one discussion theme that has already come up in the chat, and that is obviously really important to this conference, is the emphasis not only on presenting things visually and thinking through knowledge translation, but making sure that whatever we're doing is accessible. So, Alberto, I don't know, maybe if you could respond.
Yeah, I can reply to that. Yes. So,
So I'm just going to read the question, or unless you want to do it.
Yeah, I can do that. What are ways to ensure that the growing emphasis on visual displays of information and use of images doesn't leave out of the picture people who have visual impairments? This is an ongoing discussion in visualization, and I mean, visualization is about visuals, obviously, right? So it's about using the visual areas of the brain to decode information. The thing is that the visual areas of the brain can be accessed through your eyes, so basically information can go through your eyes, but there's also opportunities to, as I mentioned before, to use sound to basically envision the data inside your brain, or to communicate the data inside your brain. And this is an area that is still to be explored. It's an completely unexplored area. And I'm really excited about the possibilities in the future for this. But not only that, not only using sound, also using tactile displays. So basically using 3D printers, for example. You create your graphic on the computer in a 3D environment, for instance, and instead of just exporting it as an image or a video, you print it in 3D. So people who are visually impaired can actually use their fingers to, or their hands in total, to decode the information. So I don't have an answer to the question of how we ensure that we don't leave these people out of the picture, but I'm certainly interested in exploring this area in the future, and I do believe that it's one of the areas of growth in the future, for sure.
Thanks, Alberto.
Can I answer as well? This is Tiffany. I have an idea on this too. That's a bit more,
Sure.
especially as you're talking about audio data. I think this is where some radio and podcast news presentations could be really helpful, where they provide data and information audibly, and I think that's a really interesting way for you to get some sense as to how to do that. And I don't want to go into the specifics now. I'm just thinking of a couple specific examples. There was a radio lab recently, I believe it was over the summer, that had a CRISPR, and it actually had the sound of what a repeat would sound like. I thought it was really interesting the way that was done. So the person who's asking the question, it'd be good to listen to some really good media displays of audio information, how they get that across. It might give you some ideas.
This is Carmen. I would like to say a couple of things. I think this question addresses how do we merge the information that we got in the first presentation and the information that we had here. One idea is, communication using language. If you can see it in a table and understand it, we should be able to use language to communicate what we have in a graph. And also, I want to mention that there are some researchers that are also using vibration to communicate not only data visualization, but also other data. So right now, the thing they're doing is trying to communicate to the brain things that we don't usually are able to sense. And so I think that would also be another way to visualize data through vibration. And I think that NIDLR has a role in this, and that maybe a call for proposals or trying to focus on developing more research in this area would be a great way to support this endeavor.
Well, that is really fascinating, Carmen. I mean, it would really address people with multiple disabilities using vibrations, not only visual. I know the other reactors, you're all NIDLR grantees. How have you all been grappling with visual displays of data and trying to make sure that it's as accessible as possible? John, I know you're with ICI. How do you, and I know I get your newsletter where you have really great visuals.
Sorry, I was on mute. So one of the things, I mean, I'm not sure that what we do, I mean, I think it's been pretty well represented in what's been talked about today. I mean, I think the key point, maybe it's kind of underscoring that idea around taking a multimodal approach, you know, and really thinking about what the story is behind, you know, the data that you're trying to present, and to, you know, to use the design elements that, you know, that are clean and visually appealing, which I think, you know, is definitely part art as well. But to also think about the other different modalities in terms of describing the data, both, you know, as a, you know, kind of a tag, you know, for a screen reader, but also to complement what you're calling out in the, you know, in the figures in the text itself, and, you know, to really be able to kind of refer back to those things kind of seamlessly to really make that story. So.
Yeah, multi-platform has definitely helped us at KTDRR as well. Teresa or Judith?
Yeah, this is Teresa, and I not only agree with John, it got me thinking how, you know, we really all have to continue to be very purposeful and deliberate and keep it on the radar. I know we do here in many ways for some of the work we do, but sometimes, you know, the researcher, you get so excited about the data that this is a very nice reminder about how we present it in the multi-formats and modes to make sure everyone has access to it. So this is a really great point.
This is Judith. I can't say that I really have anything earth-shattering to add, but we try to be really conscientious about the images that we use and make sure that they are contributing, and ensure that our documents follow accessibility guidelines. And there's some nice resources out there. Let me look real fast, and I can put it in the chat box, but there's a resource with some downloadable guidelines for how to make sure that your Word documents and your PowerPoints are all accessible for screen readers. So if I find it here in a minute, I'll stick it in the chat box.
Great, thanks. I'm sure everybody would appreciate that.
Actually, this is Teresa, and I'm looking for ours too. We have a huge list here from our Office of Accessibility Technology. So once I find it, I will put it up as well or send it to one of you all.
Thank you. Jeff Chaikin from the National Association, just NARIC. It's all these acronyms, you get used to the acronyms. So NARIC.com is pointing out that Touch Graphics has developed tools in this area, so that's touchgraphics.com. Lena is noting that they've been required to provide written descriptions for all graphs, and then those who are visually impaired can link to this to readers, as we've been discussing. And Joanne is asking, Tiffany, do you have any comments about getting your research across the digital divide?
So I am assuming by digital, this is Tiffany, I'm assuming by digital divide you mean people who have ready access to digital and people who do not. Is that correct?
Yes, or even as
Yes,
we
okay.
noted in this conference, some people are moving to mobile too. So
Right.
there's no platform versus platform and then various platforms.
Right. Yeah, so I think those are kind of two different questions, but I guess part of it is understanding the audiences that you're trying to reach and being aware of all the different issues that may stand in your way of getting to them. So obviously, if there's an access issue, then trying to find other ways to communicate in addition to online is really important. And I do think that's where a lot of the in-person stuff and doing things in your local community or in the communities of places you're trying to reach is really important. For example, libraries where people are able to access to computers, trying to reach the demographics and where they are, as opposed to assuming that they will come to you. And then I think the other about platform, that's a good question in terms of how much is now being done on mobile as opposed to on actual devices, full computers. And I think that's only going to increase in the future. And most places, news agencies as well as many others who are doing online work are moving in that direction toward being mobile first, actually, and desktop second. So I think you'll continue to see that. So a lot of that is about simplifying what you place online and making sure things are readable and the different standings that you need to do that. So I think that'll be interesting to watch as that develops. But I do feel like that's a huge issue in terms of people accessing content, especially in many countries where people are only using phones to get internet access, for example, instead of using laptop or desktop computers.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. So I'm looking at our list of audiences there, and we don't have rural communities up there. And given that those communities are those that tend sometimes not to have as much access to good, fast internet, any of the NIDALA grantees are on the line. Do you have large constituencies for your projects that are rural, and have you had to try to figure out ways to reach them in multi-platform ways or however? Apparently not.
This is Teresa.
Okay,
No, this is Teresa Grassi, and I was just saying that, our project is working with schools and adult providers in a lot of different, a variety of areas, and we have to think so much about, with schools, the firewalls of what they can get access to and what they can't, and in some of our community area, rural areas, just getting access to high-speed internet, or how we display it, of how long it will take it up. And then just of a recent survey, we just found out that so many individuals, especially individuals, well, a lot of individuals, but intellectual and developmental disabilities, they don't even have access to technology. So it's about how do we think about the variety of audiences, and then how are we going to tell the story in the variety of messages that have to go out. So it has become a constant charge of thinking about who are the audiences, where are they, what's the message, but then how do we get the information to them?
This is Alberto.
yeah.
I would like to add to something that was mentioned before about, because it is all related, like accessibility, etc., about the mobile-first approach. This is certainly something that is happening in the news industry. If you ask any department in news publications that does a visualization or data journalism and infographics, they are all going mobile first. In some cases, they don't even think about creating the same project for the desktop computer. They create just for mobile platforms, and that's it. If they have time, as an afterthought, they do it for the computer screen. But in most cases, they do it just for the mobile platform.
is John Kramer. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is kind of what the role of open access is in all of this. And I know that kind of referring to the open access movement, and I've been looking a little bit at how can you disseminate work to be more universally accessible behind paywalls, not just located on project website. Not kind of branching out a little bit, and how do you kind of seed your work to a broader, even a broader virtual audience, maybe to universities or local colleges that don't necessarily have a lot of resources for a lot of journal subscriptions. And so I know a lot of universities that we belong to have institutional repositories that use that all link together. I think it's called the Open Access Network. I'm going to post the link here. But everything I've been reading about that is it really increases your readership over your work, over the life of the work. There's some questions obviously around intellectual property and copyright stuff that we should all be aware of anyway, but in the work that we produce. But if your goal is to really drive readership and to reach harder to access populations, it seems like a good kind of low cost, high benefit way of really exposing your work. So.
Okay, I know Alberto, you have noted that you're going to need to leave in a couple of minutes. So
I have time. I can wait until the very end. I was just checking the schedule. It says until 5 p.m. I can stay.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been talking about sort of different audiences with respect to rural or not, or whatever their practices are with respect to the kind of technology they use or can't use. But again, thinking back to what a lot of you wrote when you registered, we solicited your questions, and a lot of the questions pertained to trying to meet the needs of either a specific audience, especially policymakers and clinicians, a lot of you asked about, or trying to think through how can something be designed to meet more than one audience. So again, for the grantees on the phone, John, Judith, Teresa, and Carmen, do any of you have experience trying to reach policymakers specifically?
No.
No, this is Judith. I don't currently, but I'm starting to actually to pull together some products for our current research that we're finishing up here, and policymakers will be one of the people that we're trying to reach. And I think what we've learned, at least at the Beach Center over the years, has been that stories matter. Like, you can give a lot of data to policymakers, but if you couch it in somebody's actual story, you put a face to it, a name to it, and what happened with them, it seems to have greater impact on their buy-in to the data, I guess.
This is Teresa, and I am fortunate that I work pretty closely with our policymakers, and quite often they request the data, not so much about the current project I'm in, because they've been involved in it all along, and so they are looking for policy implications. But I agree that I always have to tell a story of the person, the face behind the data, and that makes a pretty powerful story for them, and that's the story I want to tell, but it also shows that impact. I also sometimes think about what's the problem they're trying to solve, and quite often I could pull the data from my current project or other projects I have, that I could pull the data to say, this may help you look at this. especially when legislators are asking a lot of questions. I'm fortunate enough, though, that I have an administration right now, and it may not last, but right now, that it's very data-driven. So I hope it continues.
This is Tiffany. I was just going to weigh in because we do a lot of policy work at AAAS with national, but also state and local. And I think one of the things is thinking about which policymakers you're trying to reach and what types of things they're interested in. So if you're doing a state and local policy outreach, giving stories and providing data relevant to the constituents that they serve is often going to be a useful way in.
And this is Alberto, and I come from a completely different world, the world of journalism. So our audience is potentially anybody and everybody, right? So it's really difficult to tailor your message when your audience is so broad. So, but what I have done in the past, and I encourage my students to do, is always to test their graphics. So they say they produce a visualization, they produce an infographic or any kind of message. And if they can, they should be conducting like scientific tests with that. So actually doing experiments and analyze how the message is received and understood. But in many cases, obviously, it's not possible to do that. So the alternative will be to do non-scientific tests, just showing your graphics, your products to people who you believe may be sort of representative of the audiences that you're going to be talking to, and then asking them to read your graphics and basically record the reactions to those graphics, what they get from those graphics, what they learn from those graphics. If they struggle with a particular portion of your graphic, note that down, all right? Because it will help you down the road to design better graphics, right? You can learn from your own mistakes or your own wrong assumptions.
Yes, definitely. And I was just typing the chat, but I'll just say it. As some of you may or may not know, our center, KTDRR, is housed at the American Institutes for Research, and we also hold the Knowledge Translation Center for the Model Systems. And I know consistently they do fact sheets and they do what they call cognitive testing, where they have the users read through and give feedback. And also for instrumentation, you can do a kind of meta review where someone reads the questions of whatever it is, the focus group or the survey, and thinks out loud of how they're reacting to the questions at the time. So not necessarily related to visualization, but is aligned with what you're talking about.
No, absolutely, yes.
So we're getting some participation from the chat here. Judy Zazula is pointing out our My Care, My Call study resource guide, rates resources and educational materials according to a consumer's level of activation. Judy, is that, what kind of care? Is it a healthcare oriented resource or something different? So I'll give you a chance to respond to that question. And she's noting that they similarly have a content expert panel and consumer advisory board review and critique our graphics, as well as study and ed materials, which of course is highly encouraged by our funding agency, NIDLR. And in the disability world, for those of you who aren't aware, when we say consumer, we're talking about people with disabilities specifically. Moving on, well, are there any other thoughts? There's a long list of audiences here, whether somebody has something to say. In this instance, we've just started talking potentially about patients, families, allies, caregivers. Is anyone coming at this angle, the issues of knowledge translation from the perspective of the world of healthcare? That's something. Yeah, okay. So Judy's resource is related to self-advocacy, healthcare, education. Thanks, Judy. And as far as service providers, I did want to note, someone was talking earlier about how there are firewalls. I guess it was one of our reactors. And that also can be the instance for some state vocational rehabilitation agencies, which are important audience for some NIDLR projects. And I don't know if some of you participating or on the phone have run into that as well. So you want to do, like, for example, Facebook or Twitter outreach, but the staff can't participate, or YouTube or whatever. So we ourselves, for our Knowledge Translation for Employment Research Center, have had to find workarounds for some of the state VR staff.
This is Teresa Grassi, and we've had to do the same thing. Our VR staff is, although they're fighting it right now pretty good, but they're not allowed access, but they're using their personal accounts to be able to see some things. So we're having to do it in a variety of ways, from email to blogs to other social media. And actually our director now has a Facebook account for the agency as well as a Twitter account. But it is taking a lot of work to work through for the individual staff to get access to it. Sort of sad that our state agencies are taking so long to get on board.
Well, I mean, they do have, grounds for caution, particularly anything related to employment, and social media is pretty broad. So I can understand, but from the perspective of wanting to use a tool, it can be frustrating. We have about 5 more minutes left for discussion, and there's 2 ways we could go. And I'm going to go with responding to Linda Anderson's question. What about knowledge translation for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or IDD? And it's been raised, I think, earlier up in the comment thing. So how have, again, John, I think this is a big constituency for your work at the ICI. How do you meet the needs of people who may have trouble reading typical scientific text, or even, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily have like one kind of really piece of advice on this. I mean, I think we've been more successful the more we've engaged self-advocates, at a fairly high level, self-advocates becoming empowered, for example, in working with them to provide technical assistance on some of our products, and working with them to co-author products and things like that. That's kind of the first thing, and that does a couple of things. One, it makes sure that it's cognitively accessible, but it also makes sure that it's relevant to their, what they're interested in. So, I think it's kind of both things that go hand in hand. It's also, you just need to make sure that what you're doing is relevant to their experience.
And I remember, Tiffany, you brought that up as well, is making something interesting. And one thing I know the Canadian Institutes for Health Research has really promoted is stakeholder engagement in designing products and research studies, so that whatever is in the end going to be translated actually is developed in conjunction with audience members as active participants in shaping what it's going to be.
Right, and the whole research process. Yeah, from generation of the research questions to the final product. So.
Exactly.
I believe there's a term for that called co-production of knowledge, and that's absolutely, if you're able to do that, and that's the best way to make sure that your audience will be a recipient, obviously.
Yes. And the CIHR, the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, I know they call that integrated KT as opposed to end-of-project KT. So we do have, let me just see what's been going on over here on the chat. People are leaving, pointing out plain language is a key element for cognitive access. Sometimes that's easier said than done, so we welcome anybody's ideas for plain language, particularly if you know of any glossaries that help readers understand terms that often come up in scientific studies like intervention or even population. Tiffany was pointing out in her presentation that sometimes words that are just regular old nouns get put together and they actually mean something quite specific in the scientific context. Okay, so I do see some people are needing to sign off, and there are a few housekeeping things we need to do before the top of the hour. I did just want to let any of the reactors a chance if there's some thought, you took the time to prepare, and we appreciate that. So is there something that hasn't come up yet that you really wanted to be able to share with the group? Because I know we didn't get to that last question about picking fast, cheaper, good, because usually you can get only 2 out of 3 is sort of a project management aphorism.
So this is Tiffany. I just to the last point about cost, time, and quality, that's a huge issue. One of the things I like to remind scientists, though, that want to have everything perfect, that perfect can be the enemy of good, and that sometimes in order to make good communication, you have to be fast and cheap. So making sure that you get the training and you use it as well as you can and you practice, I think is really the best opportunity. Practice and learn from your mistakes and keep going.
I also want to just, I just wanted to say one quick thing too. I think part of it really is learning how to seed your work where people are more likely to find it in the future. And so, I think, open access would be one example. I think also making sure, that you fully using grant resources, and kind of affiliated institutions whose mandate is to promote work like this, to really use those things, because people in the future will try to look up stuff on the internet and be more likely to find what you're doing. So.
This is Carmen. I also wanted to say that I feel that these 2 topics, communication and visualization, we need to start integrating more of actual training within the teaching that we do and within the training of PhD students and postdocs, because certainly practice it's needed, but if we start too late, then there's a lot of things that we miss. So I think that right now trying to integrate maybe Twitter or Facebook within the things that we teach would be great to really hone in those communication skills with students and future researchers.
Yes, and there's definitely KTDRR regularly collects data from the grantees to find out what kinds of trainings do you want, and this kind of nuts and bolts training when people are interested in the theory, but they also really appreciate when there's the how-to aspect of our training. So that's obviously consistent with what you're hearing from your students of what they could benefit from as well.